The council chamber had never seemed so high, nor the city below so hungry. Anakin Skywalker stood alone between the last gold of evening and the first blue pulse of night, and all the lights of Coruscant glittered beneath him like 1,000 false answers. The windows rose around him in solemn silence. The floor held the day's heat in its stone, but the air above it was cold, moving restlessly through the chamber as if the temple itself could not settle. His left hand, the one of flesh, trembled. The mechanical right stayed obediently still, though he felt the phantom ache there more keenly than he had in months. Pain from a hand that did not exist. Fear for a future that had not happened. A life ruled, again and again, by wounds he could not close. Mace Windu had gone to arrest the Chancellor. No, to arrest Darth Sidious. The name still had the quality of poison. It moved through Anakin's thoughts and left them thinner, blackened at the edges. Chancellor Palpatine, mentor, confidant, patient listener in moments when the council had measured him and found him troublesome, had spoken the truth with that same mild voice he used to discuss committee votes and outer rim supply lines. He had admitted it almost gently. He had done worse. He had smiled at the fear he himself had cultivated, and offered salvation with one hand and damnation with the other. The tragedy of Darth Plagueis the wise. The power to keep the ones he cared about from dying. Anakin shut his eyes. Even now, even after revelation, even after he had gone to Mace with the truth, that promise still moved through him with terrible life. In his dreams, Padmé died over and over. Sometimes in fire, sometimes in blood, sometimes in a silence so complete it made waking a kind of violence. Each time he opened his eyes, he found himself gasping as he had gasped on Tatooine beside his mother's body. He had not been able to save Shmi Skywalker. He had not been able to save the child he had once been from what came afterward. There were nights when the Tusken camp still lived inside his bones. The sound of it, the heat, the revelation that rage could hollow a man and make room for anything. He had thought the Jedi way would keep him from that abyss. Then the war had come, and the Order had taken up command, and the line between guardian and weapon had thinned to transparency. The Council had trusted him enough to set him among masters, and not enough to call him one. They had asked him to spy. They had spoken of the Chancellor with caution and of Anakin himself with subtler caution still. They had watched him for the same reason others watched unstable stars, in case of eruption. The city hummed below him. Air lanes stitched the dark in moving bands of red and white. Somewhere in that endless layered sprawl Padmé Amidala was waiting, perhaps pacing, perhaps resting a hand over the hidden curve of her belly, perhaps already sensing in her own quiet way that the galaxy had tipped and could not be righted by any old means. The thought of her steadied him and undid him in the same instant. He remembered another face too, younger and fierce with hurt. Ahsoka Tano on the temple steps, trying not to look back while leaving anyway. He remembered failing her not by malice, but by obedience, which in some seasons was worse. The Order had wrapped itself in certainty while one of its own stood accused and alone. It had expected faith from others while hoarding doubt. It had told itself it served peace while feeding a war that had turned children into officers and compassion into a tactical concern. And still there had been truth in what Obi-Wan taught him. Truth in Yoda's stern riddles. Truth in the patient discipline that said power existed to be mastered, not indulged. Truth in the moments, rare and fragile, when he had been most fully what a Jedi was meant to be. Not invulnerable, not empty, but clear. He opened his eyes. The chamber seemed smaller now, as if his indecision had been the thing giving it size. He crossed to the great window and saw his own reflection laid ghost-like over the city. A broad-shouldered man in dark robes. Hair damp at the temples. Scar over one eye. A machine hand hanging at his side like a second fate. He thought of the many people who had named him promising, dangerous, gifted, unstable, chosen. He thought of how little any of those names mattered compared with one plain fact. Each time he had surrendered to fear, someone had suffered for it. His mother. The Tuskens. Count Dooku, unarmed beneath his blade. Ahsoka. If he let fear govern him now, Padmé would be next whether she lived or died. The insight came without drama. No choir of revelation. No sudden ease. Only a hard and simple understanding that Palpatine had never offered him a way to save her. He had offered him a way to make her into the excuse for whatever he became. Power first, justification after. Love twisted until it could be worn as ownership. It was not mercy. It was appetite dressed as destiny. Anakin's breath left him in a sharp rush. Mace had gone to arrest a Sith Lord who had ruled the Republic from the center of its own trust. Mace Windu, Agent Kohler, Kit Fisto. Skilled men, all of them, but Sidious had controlled the war itself. He had hidden in plain sight before a whole galaxy. Men like that did not wait in their offices to be chained. Anakin was already moving before the thought finished. His boots struck the chamber floor and echoed. He hit the corridor at a run, robe flaring behind him. Temple guards straightened at the sight of his face and asked no questions. He cut through the silent halls, down the long lift shaft, past chambers fragrant with incense and old stone. The temple seemed suspended between breaths. Younglings in distant rooms. Masters in meditation. Droids whispering over polished floors. All of it unbearably fragile. He took the speeder from the southern platform and drove it like a bolt torn from weather. Coruscant rushed up around him in tiers of light and shadow, towers like black spears banded in gold. Traffic split around his path. Horns flared. A transport listed sideways to avoid him and vanished beneath. The wind slapped his face raw. The city smelled of ionization and exhaust, and rain gathering somewhere far above the upper levels. He leaned into the controls until the engine screamed. Palpatine's voice kept pace with him. Only through me. I have the power to save the one you love. You do not yet realize your importance. Lies, Anakin thought, and then corrected himself with the severity of a man tearing a habit at the root. Not just lies. Hooks. Every kindness a hook. Every confidence a thread. Every carefully timed disappointment between Anakin and the Council, another hand closing around his throat before he knew there were fingers there. He saw again the Chancellor's office as it had been an hour earlier. The warm firelight, the red draperies, the casual elegance, the cultivated weariness of a good man carrying too much. Then the same mouth shaping the name of Darth Plagueis, the same eyes fixed on Anakin with a hunger too old to be human. You must choose. Yes, Anakin thought, but not between you and Mace. Not between the Jedi and Padmé. Not between love and duty, as if those were enemies by nature. He would choose between fear and something harder. Between becoming the weapon his suffering wanted to make of him and remaining, however bruised, responsible for himself. The Chancellor's executive spire reared ahead like a blade. Security craft moved around it in disciplined loops. The upper windows burned orange in the dying light. Anakin cut power, dropped to a lower lane, and shot toward the private landing platform. He was too late to arrive quietly. A tremor went through the Force then, violent enough to tighten every muscle in his body. Not a sound, but the spiritual equivalent of one. Metal shrieking, intention colliding with intention, death opening its hand. His heart kicked once so hard it hurt. He leapt from the speeder before it had settled, hit the platform at a run, and heard the first real scream from within the tower. When the doors opened to him, the smell met him before the sight did. Ozone, scorched silk, burning circuitry, and the copper edge of blood. He drew his lightsaber and ran toward the storm. The Chancellor's office had become the inside of a wound. One wall had blown outward into the dusk, and beyond it, the city streamed in dizzying strata of light. The polished floor was gouged and blackened. A toppled sculpture of some long-dead Republic founder lay in pieces against a cracked table. Sparks rained from severed conduits. Agent Kohler lay near the entrance, motionless, one hand still lifted as if defense might yet matter. CZTon had fallen closer to the center of the room, his expression fixed in that stunned incompleteness the dead wore, when surprise had been the last thing permitted them. Kit Fisto was crumpled by the shattered viewport, green blade extinguished, his bright, easy presence gone so thoroughly that the room itself seemed to have lost color. At the far end, between the wreckage and the open drop, Mace Windu held his ground against a creature that had once worn Supreme Chancellor's robes with persuasive dignity. Palpatine was crouched low, face pulled into angles by hatred and pain. Red silk burned away along one sleeve, one hand clutching at the arm of his chair, the other sending torrents of white-blue lightning against Mace's raised blade. The room strobed. Lightning wrapped the violet saber and screamed. Mace's expression was carved from concentration and fury both. His jaw set, his boots slipping by increments through melted flooring as he forced the current back toward its source. Then Palpatine saw Anakin. The change in him was instant and obscene. His features, twisted moments earlier into pure predation, rearranged themselves around a broken plea. His voice came raw, but still cunning, still pitched to the secret chamber of Anakin's longing. "Anakin," he cried. "Help me. The Jedi are taking over." Mace did not turn his head. "Stay back." Anakin took 2 more steps into the room and stopped amid the dead. Ozone scraped his throat. His own pulse sounded louder than the lightning. This, he thought with a strange, clean clarity, was the actual shape of all Palpatine's kindnesses. Not the man who had praised him after races on Naboo, not the sympathetic elder who had listened to complaints about the council with such gracious concern. This, with his lip peeled back from his teeth and murder bright in his eyes. This thing that had guided fleets into slaughter and hidden behind statecraft while worlds burned. And yet the temptation did not vanish because the monster was visible. Padmé dying. The dream of it opened again, cruel and immediate. Her body slack on white sheets, his name unfinished on her lips. Their child never drawing breath. If there existed even the smallest possibility that the man before him could prevent that, no. The answer came from somewhere deeper than panic and older than desire. No, because he had seen what came of bargains made in terror. No, because Palpatine's promise always required one prior surrender, and then another after that, with no last surrender ever in sight. No, because whatever power Sidious possessed, he would wield it not to save Padmé but to make her life another debt on Anakin's soul. "Anakin!" Mace barked. "He is too dangerous." Palpatine's voice cut across his. "I can save her. I can teach you." The room flashed white as the lightning surged. Mace's muscles locked. The blade dipped a finger's width. The window support behind him snapped, scattering shards into open air. It was the kind of moment on which galaxies were lost. Anakin stepped forward. Palpatine's eyes lit with triumph before it had been earned. "Yes," he whispered, and the whisper carried an empire inside it. Anakin ignited his saber. Blue light joined violet. He came in at Mace's flank and angled his blade into the torrent, catching the lightning along the polished emitter and driving it back with both hands. The impact slammed through his arms and chest and into the mechanical joints of his right hand until the servo screamed. Pain flared, hot and electric. He bared his teeth and held. Palpatine's triumph vanished. For an instant, no one moved except the current itself. 2 blades. 2 Jedi. 1 storm forced backward. The Sith Lord's face warped beneath his own power. Not the mild ruination he would later display to sympathetic cameras, but a rapid, monstrous unraveling. Skin drawn tight, then sagging, eyes yellowing deeper, mouth widening around a snarl that no longer remembered statesmanship. His scream filled the office. Mace advanced half a step. Anakin advanced with him. The lightning broke like a wave against a cliff and came back in brighter folds. Palpatine dropped, rolled, and his free hand snapped out in a blur. A second lightsaber, small, crimson, hidden somewhere in the folds of his robes or the wreckage of the desk, spat into his palm. He lunged not at Mace but at Anakin, quick as hatred itself. Anakin met the strike on instinct. Red and blue struck sparks between them. The Sith's face was inches from his now, and there was no masquerade left anywhere in it. "You are mine," Palpatine hissed. The words struck Anakin with disproportionate force. Not because he believed them, but because he suddenly saw how often they had been true in spirit. "Mine," said fear. "Mine," said expectation. "Mine," said prophecy. Said the council. Said the war. Said every grief that had ever tried to turn love into a chain. The realization hardened him instead of shattering him. "No," he said. He slammed his mechanical forearm into Palpatine's wrist, twisted, and heard bone crack. The hidden saber spun away into darkness beyond the broken wall. Mace came over the top with a descending cut that severed the armrests of the Chancellor's chair and drove Palpatine to one knee. The Sith answered with a pulse of force power violent enough to send debris tearing through the room. Anakin ducked a bronze bust. Mace took a slab of statuary to the shoulder and staggered but did not fall. Palpatine tried to rise, and Anakin did the simplest thing he had not done often enough in his life. He acted without waiting for permission from fear. He hurled the broken remains of the Founder's statue with the Force. Stone slammed into Palpatine's side. Mace was there immediately, purple blade at the Sith's throat. Anakin came in opposite, blue points centered over the withered chest. For the first time since Anakin had entered the office, Palpatine was not attacking. He was calculating. "Listen to me," he rasped. And though his face had become something nightmarish, the voice still knew how to seek sympathy. "The Senate will never believe this. The Jedi have no authority. You need me alive." "He is right about one thing," Anakin said, breathing hard. "Alive." Mace's eyes flicked to him. There was no warmth in them, but there was recognition of necessity, of changed choice, perhaps even of the fact that Anakin had just refused something Mace himself could barely understand. "He will stand trial if he can be held." "He can be held," Anakin said, though he had no certainty of it. What he had was something narrower and stranger, a conviction that if they crossed this line now, if they killed him in anger while the city glowed below and the Senate waited to be told a story, then Sidious would still win. Maybe not today, maybe not in the same fashion, but some essential thing would rot. Palpatine's sunken eyes moved between them, reading distance, exploiting habit. "Master Windu would murder a defenseless man," he whispered. Mace's jaw tightened. "Defenseless?" And suddenly the old man on the floor smiled. The smile was tiny and horrible. It appeared just before the emergency doors burst inward, and the first of the Chancellor's crimson guards rushed in with electrostaffs raised. Palpatine had activated some silent alarm after all, or one of his aides had. The guards saw only a room of dead Jedi, a disfigured Chancellor pinned between blades, and a broken office open to the sky. They moved according to training and appearances both. "Stand down!" Mace thundered. They did not. Anakin was already turning. One electrostaff met his blade and split in molten halves. Another came low. He vaulted it, landed inside the guard's reach, and hit the man with a force shove hard enough to flatten him against a wall. Mace disarmed the third and fourth almost contemptuously, but each heartbeat spent on them was a heartbeat Palpatine wanted. The Sith rolled, fingers clawing towards some recessed panel along the floor. Anakin saw it. So did Mace. Both moved. Mace reached him first, boot crashing down on the withered hand. Bones snapped. Palpatine shrieked and spat lightning wild across the floor. It caught one of the fallen guards and threw him smoking into the far wall. The others froze at last, shock outrunning obedience. Anakin used that instant. He slapped the comm control at his belt and barked a temple priority code. "Jedi emergency. Executive spire. Highest level. Temple gods now." The response came almost at once, clipped and steady. "Confirmed." Palpatine sagged back, breath ragged, yet the smile returned. "Too late," he murmured. The words slid coldly through Anakin. Too late for what? He felt the Force then not as certainty but as multiplied unease. Signals moving out through channels he could not see. Commitments already made. Armies across the stars still obeying chains forged from lies. Sidious had not built his power into one office and one face. He had threaded it through institutions, through loyalties, through fear of chaos, through the Republic's exhausted desire to be led by a strong hand. They had captured the spider and were only beginning to perceive the web. Temple guards arrived in ochre robes and featureless masks, bringing stun pikes, binders, and the impersonal calm of those trained for sacred violence. They ringed the room in disciplined silence. Mace did not remove his blade from Palpatine's throat until magnetic manacles sealed over the Sith's wrists and ankles, not because he believed the restraint sufficient, but because insufficient was all the galaxy possessed. "Seal the building," Mace ordered. "No one in or out without council authorization. Full communication lockdown." A guard inclined his head. Already in motion, Palpatine looked up at Anakin from the floor. In his ruined face, only the eyes remained truly unchanged, and they were terrible precisely because they held no shock, only adaptation. He had gambled on Anakin and lost that hand. There were more. "You have no idea what you have done," he said softly. Anakin met his gaze. For once in his life, he did not answer the voice that wanted him afraid. "Neither do you," he said. By the time Anakin reached Padmé's apartment, the entire planet seemed to have heard some version of what had happened. News traveled in Coruscant not like wind, but like infection. By the time a speeder crossed 3 districts, rumor had already crossed 10 more. The holonet flashed emergency banners over public concourses. Senate aides whispered into comlinks on moving sidewalks. Security checkpoints thickened around the central districts. The usual orchestral murmur of the upper levels had sharpened into 1,000 separate anxieties, every one of them seeking an authoritative shape. He did not come through the front entrance. He landed on the private platform, left the speeder half unlocked, and crossed the polished threshold with a haste that made the droid at the door swivel in alarm. Padmé was already there in the main room, wrapped in soft gray silk, one hand braced on the back of a chair, as if she had been waiting in exactly that posture for too long. He had thought, on the way, that he would explain, that he would choose the right sequence of facts and protect her from the worst of them until she was seated, until there was water, until the trembling left his hands. Instead, he saw her face, so familiar, so intelligent, so frightened for him before she knew why, and everything careful in him broke. He crossed the room and sank to his knees before her. Padmé's breath caught. "Anakin, I told them," he said. The words came out rough. "I told Mace what he was. I went back. He swallowed. "I almost believed him." She knelt with difficulty, silk whispering against the floor, and took his face between her hands. He had blood near his collar, not all of it his. There was soot on one cheek and a fine bright cut across the back of his left wrist. She looked at him as though measuring the distance between the man before her and some precipice only she could see. "What happened?" he told her. Not in order at first. In fragments. The opera house and the tale of Darth Plagueis. The steady poisoning of months and years. The confession. Mace and the others. The dead in the Chancellor's office. The lightning. The moment of choosing. Palpatine's face collapsing under his own power. Temple guards. Emergency lockdown. All of it came out in pieces that should not have made a whole, yet she understood him well enough to assemble the whole anyway. When he was finished, the room stood very still around them. Beyond the long glass wall, Coruscant flamed in layered constellations. Traffic moved like veins of light through the darkness. Somewhere several levels below, a siren wailed and was swallowed by distance. Padmé kept one hand on his cheek and lowered the other to his mechanical fingers, curling them against her palm as if they were ordinary and warm. "You did not believe him," she said. "I wanted to." The honesty of it scraped his throat. He had imagined that confessing this to her would make her pull away. Instead, sadness moved through her features, and with it, something fiercer. "I know," she said. He stared at her. "I know what fear can make look reasonable," she said. "I know what desperation sounds like when it puts on the voice of love." But you came here. That means you know the difference too. He closed his eyes and bowed his head until his forehead touched her shoulder. Her hand moved into his hair. For a moment he let himself lean there, feeling the rhythm of her breath, the quiet persistence of life beneath silken skin, the child not yet born. His fear did not vanish. It changed shape. It became less theatrical, less absolute. It became what perhaps it had always should have been, grief for what might be lost, not permission to destroy in advance. He said he could save you, Anakin whispered. Padmé was silent long enough that he thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice had gone lower, steadier. And if he could, what do you think he would ask in return? Everything, Anakin thought. Not only deeds, not only allegiance. He would ask the right to define what saving meant. He would ask the slow corruption of every tender thing until it became leverage. Padmé touched her forehead to his. There is no future in which I would want you kept by a man like that. The words entered him with greater force than the Chancellor's lightning. For all his talk of protecting her, some part of him had indeed imagined saving his possession. Padmé alive at any cost. And the cost obscured so long as she still breathed. Now she put the lie to that with the simple authority of someone who loved him and retained ownership of herself. He let out a breath that felt trapped since childhood. There was a soft tone from the far wall. A calm signal. Padmé did not move away at once. When she finally stood, she steadied herself against a table and accepted the transmission. Bail Organa appeared in pale blue holographic light, his usually composed face marked by fatigue and swift calculation. "Padmé?" he said, and then saw Anakin in the room. His brows rose only slightly. Bail had always known more than he said. "Good. I hoped he was with you." "What's happening?" Padmé asked. "The Senate is in uproar. Mace Windu is claiming the Jedi attempted a coup and mutilated the Chancellor. Several security blocks are already demanding emergency detention of the Council." Bail glanced aside as voices broke out where he stood. "Palpatine supporters are moving very quickly. He confessed to being a Sith Lord," Anakin said. Bail's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. "Then we will need more than truth. We will need proof the Senate can understand, and we will need it before fear chooses for them." "I'm coming," Padmé said. "No," Anakin said immediately. She turned to him, and for a beat the room held the oldest argument between them, one so practiced it sometimes seemed built into their breathing. His protectiveness, her refusal to be contained by it. But something in him had shifted tonight, and he recognized the old impulse for what it was, fear asking to disguise itself as care. He exhaled. "No," he said again, softer now, but for a different reason. "Not alone." A flicker of approval touched Bail's features. "Bring trusted guards. Come through the East Concourse. The central approach is already swarming with cameras." The transmission ended. Padmé moved toward her dressing room, calling for Sabé and handmaiden's access codes with the practiced calm of a stateswoman, stepping into a crisis she had no intention of surrendering to others. Anakin remained where he was for another moment, kneeling in the soft light, feeling the room fill with motion around him. Clothing. Security briefings. The droid producing med supplies he had not realized were needed. Through it all, the child stirred beneath Padmé's heart, hidden from the galaxy, and suddenly implicated in it more than ever. Across the stars, Obi-Wan Kenobi received the news on Utapau, in a sinkhole city full of drifting dust and echoing artillery. The transmission reached him between one breath and the next, while he crouched behind broken stone, blaster in hand, grease and sweat drying on his skin after another exchange with General Grievous Magna Guards. The coded voice belonged to Mace. The severity belonged to no one else. "The Chancellor is Darth Sidious. Apprehended alive. Recall all Jedi. Grievous remains active. Finish the campaign if able. Trust no Chancellor-authorized orders until verified by Council Code." Obi-Wan read the message twice, then a third time, as if repetition might make its contents less absurd. The first absurdity was the Chancellor himself. The second, perhaps greater, was the phrase apprehended alive. The third lay hidden in what was not said and therefore thundered. Anakin had done what he was asked. Anakin had told them. Anakin was still, somehow, on the side of the line where Obi-Wan might reach him. A hard private relief went through Obi-Wan, so sharp it almost resembled pain. "General?" Commander Cody called from the ledge below. Obi-Wan looked over the shattered parapet at the clone commander who had followed him through campaigns enough to read shifts in tone before words arrived. Cody's helmet was tucked under one arm, his face grimy and intent. All around him troopers reloaded, regrouped, glanced upward for orders. "New developments on Coruscant," Obi-Wan said. "We're ending this now." Grievous skittered across the opposite platform in a scream of servos and contempt. "Kenobi!" "Precisely," Obi-Wan murmured. What followed would later be told many ways, though the truth was plain enough. The battle did not end because some perfect strategy finally unfolded. It ended because Obi-Wan fought that day with a clarity that came only when the future, for a few precious minutes, ceased branching into nightmares. He drove Grievous from platform to platform, from lightsaber to bare hands to blaster, and when the cyborg warlord finally crashed in flames against the stone, Utapau seemed to release a breath it had been holding for the entire war. Cody reached him while the smoke still rose. "The message from Coruscant," Cody said. "Should I prepare the men for emergency rotation?" Obi-Wan studied the clone commander's face. No hidden hostility there. No sudden vacancy. Only disciplined readiness and a weariness Cody himself had likely forgotten to notice. Something eased in Obi-Wan again, though not enough for certainty. "Yes," he said. "And Cody, until you hear directly from me or the Council, no Chancellor's commands supersede field verification." Cody frowned, but only for an instant. "Understood, General." Night deepened over Coruscant while Padmé prepared for the Senate and Anakin stood at the glass, watching his reflection superimpose itself on a city deciding how afraid it wished to be. The holonet had already chosen its language. Attack. Mutiny. Assault. Questions were a luxury. Narratives moved faster. Behind him, Padmé emerged in senatorial white trimmed with silver, hair braided with severe elegance, face composed into the expression the Republic trusted when it wanted moral courage to look graceful. Only her eyes betrayed the stakes. Anakin crossed to her and stopped just short of touching. "There may come a point," Padmé said, "when the truth about us is the only thing left that can't be used against us." He knew what she meant. He had known it for months and pretended otherwise. "Then we tell it," he said. Her gaze searched his, testing whether he understood the cost. Public scandal. Council judgment. The end of every compromise they had built to live two lives at once. Yet the alternative now was to keep living by concealment in a world whose darkness had just been dragged into the light by force. Padmé nodded. Together they turned toward the door. And all across the planet, in offices and barracks and private rooms scented with expensive tea, men and women began deciding whether they feared Sith manipulation more than they feared a republic without Palpatine at its center. The Republic did not stop when Palpatine fell into custody. It lurched. There was no single hour in which order failed, only a succession of smaller failures that exposed how much of the state had come to rely on one man's voice. Fleets waited for clarifications that did not come. Sector governors invoked contradictory clauses. Supply routes continued into battle zones even where fighting had ceased. Holonet commentators discovered overnight that they had always harbored concerns about executive overreach, or else that they had always feared the Jedi. Military intelligence froze under competing seals. Senators who had spent years flattering the Chancellor now announced grave reservations about concentration of authority, while others demanded the immediate dissolution of the Order for crimes against the lawful head of state. Fear, Anakin learned in the next 2 days, could wear either face with equal sincerity. Palpatine was moved before dawn from the executive spire to a secure chamber beneath the Republic judicial complex, Not because the Jedi trusted the Senate and not because the Senate trusted the Jedi, but because neither side trusted the other with him alone. The chamber had ray shields at every threshold, rotating guard details, and enough surveillance to satisfy bureaucrats. None of it seemed adequate to Anakin, who had seen lightning boil from the man's hands, and had heard the impossible composure in his voice, even while pinned beneath 2 lightsabers. Mace visited the detention levels twice that first night and 3 times the day after. Each time he emerged with his expression more severe than before. "He's probing everyone," Mace said during a brief exchange in a temple corridor. "Not with tricks, with truth where it weakens. Guard rotation, private resentments, ambitions. He doesn't need to turn everyone, only the right few." There was a bruise darkening along Mace's jaw and stiffness in one shoulder where the statue had struck him. He looked older than he had 3 days earlier, and perhaps harder too. Yet there was something else in him when he faced Anakin now. Not ease. Never that. But an altered calculation. "You did well," Mace said. It was so far from the sort of sentence Anakin had ever expected from him that for a moment he thought he had misheard. Mace seemed to recognize the reaction and gave the faintest tightening of mouth in place of apology. "I'm not saying everything is mended. I am saying the galaxy still exists in roughly its present form because you made the harder choice." "Nah." Anakin stared at him, uncertain whether gratitude or bitterness should answer first. In the end, neither did. "Does the Council believe that?" "The Council," Mace said, "is not of one mind on anything worth having a mind about." Then he was gone, robes sweeping the corridor. Padmé entered the Senate that morning beneath a storm of cameras. The great chamber, ordinarily theatrical in a manner the Republic had mistaken for dignity, had become openly ravenous. Pods drifted in heated clusters. Voices broke across one another. Mace Windu, towering and grave in official scarlet, presided with a wounded patriot solemnity that fooled exactly those who most wished to be fooled. His opening statement condemned violence against the office of the Supreme Chancellor and praised the Senate's resilience in the face of unprecedented treachery. He used no one's name until the names of the dead masters had disappeared beneath the phrase "armed incursion" by members of the Jedi Order. Bail objected first. Mon Mothma seconded. Padmé third, her voice carrying not because she shouted but because she chose exact words and spent none of them carelessly. "The Senate cannot conduct an inquiry while repeating accusations supplied by the accused," she said, and the chamber shifted around the sentence like metal around a hard point. Palpatine did not appear in person. Instead, a recorded statement played above the central podium, his ruined face given flattering light, his voice lowered almost to a confidential tremor. He spoke of trust betrayed, of religious zeal, of his years of service. He did not deny being called Sidious. He merely said the title had been distorted, a ceremonial remnant from obscure cultural studies conducted for strategic understanding during the war. He admitted to possessing a lightsaber for self-defense in a dangerous age. He expressed sorrow for the Jedi who had died in the confusion. It was a performance of victimhood so practiced that Anakin, watching from a restricted gallery, felt physically ill at how persuasive it might be to anyone who had not seen the office. Bail demanded direct testimony from witnesses. Mace Windu tried to defer pending medical recovery. Padmé insisted on the creation of an independent tribunal. The chamber splintered. Meanwhile, messages went out through secure Jedi channels to every active front. Some reached their targets quickly. Others vanished or were delayed by bureaucrats suddenly uncertain which orders were legitimate. On Kashyyyk, Kyoto departed under Wookiee guard with sorrow hanging around him like weather. On Cato Nemoidia, Plo Koon turned his fighter toward a rendezvous instead of a kill box he would never enter. On Felucia, Aayla Secura received the recall code and frowned at it for a long moment before obeying. On Magito, Ki-Adi-Mundi cursed under his breath and called a council of officers. The war began to unspool, not because anyone had ended it cleanly, but because the man who had woven its opposing threads had been dragged from the loom. Obi-Wan returned to Coruscant late on the second evening. Anakin met him in the temple hangar, under cold white lights. Maintenance droids rolled between parked interceptors. Clone pilots moved supplies in disciplined lines, no one yet knowing how much suspicion would eventually fall upon their own designed obedience. Obi-Wan descended the ramp with travel dust still on his boots and fatigue written around his eyes, and for a moment the years between master and apprentice were visible in reverse. Anakin saw not the serene negotiator of legend, but the man who had raised him from boyhood with too little sleep and too much hope. They stopped a pace apart. "I take it," Obi-Wan said, looking him over with infuriating calm, "that your day was somewhat eventful." A laugh escaped Anakin, sharp and disbelieving. It nearly broke into something else. Obi-Wan stepped forward then and clasped his shoulder. The contact undid him more than praise from Mace had. "I'm sorry," Anakin said at once, for reasons too numerous to sort. For lying. For nearly falling. For making Obi-Wan spend years guessing which disaster would carry him off at last. Obi-Wan's grip tightened briefly. "You told the truth when it mattered most. That doesn't erase the rest." "No," Obi-Wan said, "but it keeps the rest from being final." They walked from the hangar into the temple's quieter interior while dusk thickened beyond the windows. Obi-Wan listened as Anakin filled in what the official reports omitted: Palpatine's promises, the duel, the dead. He listened without interruption, and if pain crossed his face at Kit Fisto's name or Saesee Tian's, he let it cross without concealment. At the doorway to a small observation cloister overlooking the city, Anakin stopped. "There's more," he said. Obi-Wan leaned one shoulder against the stone and waited. The words should have been harder after all that had already passed. Somehow, they were simpler. "Padmé is my wife," Anakin said. "She's been my wife for almost 3 years." Obi-Wan closed his eyes. Not in shock. In recognition. "I was beginning to think you would never tell me," he said. Anakin stared. "You knew?" Obi-Wan opened his eyes again and gave him a look so tired and dry that it almost qualified as affectionate reproach. "Anakin, I taught you to lie. I know the signs when you attempted for noble reasons." Day. The attempt at levity faded. He turned toward the city, hands loose behind his back. "I did not know everything," he said quietly. "But I knew enough, or suspected enough. I chose not to force the question because certainty would have demanded action, and I was not nearly as certain of the righteousness of that action as the code would have preferred." Anakin watched him in silence. After a moment, Obi-Wan added, "The heart is not a machine that obeys because it has been given instructions. I learned that long before you did. The Order sometimes mistakes discipline for the absence of feeling. They are not the same." "Nai." He did not say Satine's name. He did not need to. Anakin felt something ache open in him. Not only relief, though there was relief enough to make him dizzy, but sorrow for all the years he had spent hiding from one of the few men who might have understood him. "There's a child," he said. That did make Obi-Wan go still. "A child," he repeated. Anakin nodded. For a long moment, Obi-Wan said nothing at all. Then he let out a slow breath and looked back toward the city, which blazed below them in all its impossible magnitude. "Then the future," he said, "has become inconveniently literal." Despite everything, Anakin almost smiled. Obi-Wan's mouth shifted faintly in answer. Then it sobered. "We will have to tell the Council." "I know. And the Senate may force the matter before the Council can." "I know that too." Obi-Wan looked at him fully again. "Do you intend to leave the Order?" The question landed between them with more gentleness than threat. Anakin understood that Obi-Wan was not asking what the code required. He was asking what remained possible. "I don't know," Anakin admitted. "I know I'm finished lying." "That," Obi-Wan said, "is the first sensible thing anyone has said in this temple in weeks." A bell sounded somewhere in the lower halls, not an alarm, but a summons. The old temple acknowledging a convergence of necessity. Yoda had arrived. The council was gathering. The city below them burned on, indifferent and magnificent. Obi-Wan straightened from the wall. "Well," he said, "the dryness back as shield and comfort both, if we are to destroy several centuries of institutional habit in one evening. We should try not to be late." Rain came to Coruscant that night, rare and theatrical, striking the temple windows in silvery sheets that turned the city beyond into a dissolving mosaic. Inside, the council chamber held the kind of silence that forms not from peace, but from the effort of many people not to say the wrong thing first. The lights were dimmed lower than usual. 3 places in the circle remained empty for the dead. 2 more were occupied only by blue holograms, flickering from distant ships hurrying inward under emergency recall. Yoda stood near the central floor rather than taking his seat immediately, his small figure somehow making the room feel more ancient than its stone. Kashyyyk mud still marked the hem of his cloak. The war had barely left him, and already something worse had replaced it. Anakin entered with Obi-Wan. Mace was already there, one arm folded within his robe because the shoulder beneath it still pained him. Plo Koon's hologram crackled from orbit over Cato Nemoidia. Ki-Adi-Mundi appeared in ghostly blue from a transport above Megiddo. Shakti stood beside the Eastern Arch, summoned from the temple medical wing where she had spent 2 sleepless days, reviewing reports no one had wanted reviewed until now. Padmé, by special request, and with extraordinary reluctance from several parties, was permitted inside the chamber because the crisis had outgrown the boundaries in which the Order usually liked to confine itself. The fact of her presence told Anakin almost as much as anything else. The council knew the old walls were already failing. Yoda looked first at Mace. "Report, Doc." Mace gave it without ornament. The confession. The dead masters. The capture. Palpatine's accusations. Senate reaction. The shifting military chain. When he finished, the room absorbed the facts in strained quiet. Hologram static crackled where Plo Koon should have exhaled. Ki-Adi-Mundi broke first. A Sith Lord in the Chancellor's office for years, perhaps longer. This failure is not small. "No," Mace said, and his tone suggested that he had already told himself worse. Padmé spoke before anyone could move on. "Failure is only useful if it is named precisely. The Republic trusted Palpatine because he offered certainty in a frightened age. The Jedi failed to expose him, yes. But the Senate fed him power because fear was politically convenient. If anyone in this room wishes to pretend one institution alone is guilty, you are already helping him." "Hey." Several heads turned toward her. Anakin felt both pride and dread, as he always did when Padmé entered a room determined to speak the exact truth others preferred blurred. Yoda's ears tilted in what might have been approval. "Right. Senator Amidala is." Mace's gaze moved to Anakin. The whole chamber followed. Anakin knew there would be no better moment, and no more merciful one. Truth did not become easier by waiting in rooms like this. "I have something to say," he said. Obi-Wan folded his hands more tightly behind his back, but otherwise gave no sign. Padmé looked at Anakin with grave steadiness. Yoda nodded once. Anakin stepped toward the center. "I told you about Palpatine because it was the truth," he said. "I did not tell you everything. That was also the truth, only delayed." He drew breath. "Padmé Amidala is my wife. We were married on Naboo after Geonosis. She is carrying my child." "Nay." The rain against the windows seemed suddenly loud enough to be a crowd. Ki-Adi-Mundi's hologram blinked once, twice. Plo Koon went very still. Shakti closed her eyes briefly as if some long suspicion had at last been given proper shape. Mace's expression did not change, which Anakin found irritating in a way that almost steadied him. It was Obi-Wan who moved first, stepping one pace closer not as intervention but as witness. Padmé remained exactly where she was. She would not let her truth stand behind his. Yoda lowered himself into his chair with great deliberation. "Afraid of telling us you were." "Yes," Anakin said. "Afraid of losing her too." The words entered the room like a blade pulled free. No accusation in them. Only recognition. "Yes." Mace spoke then. "Did Palpatine know?" Anakin looked at him. I think he knew nearly from the beginning. He never said it plainly until the end. He didn't need to. He only needed to know what I feared. And the visions? Yoda asked. Anakin hesitated. There was no point holding back now. I saw Padmé dying. Over and over. I believed Palpatine might know how to stop it. No one spoke for several heartbeats. Then Padmé did. The problem, she said, is not that Anakin loved. It is that every structure around him taught him love must become secrecy or shame. Fear grows well in closed rooms. Palpatine understood that. He did not create Anakin's attachments. He weaponized his isolation. Mace's mouth tightened. The code exists for a reason. Yes, Padmé said. And laws exist for reasons too. We amend them when they begin producing the very harm they were meant to prevent. Ki-Adi-Mundi gave a tired sound somewhere between protest and reflection. Plo Koon's hologram flickered. She is not entirely wrong, he said. Shakti looked from Anakin to Padmé and back. The war made all of us accept contradictions we would not have named before it. Children at command tables, clones bred for obedience, knights asked to spy on heads of state. We cannot pretend the old clarity remained intact while we were spending it. Mace looked at Anakin for a long time. When he spoke, the words seemed pried from somewhere unaccustomed to them. We placed you on the council to observe the Chancellor, and denied you the rank that might have made the request bearable. We expected discipline while offering distrust. That was an error. It was not an apology, but it was nearer to one than anyone in the chamber had probably ever heard from him. Anakin felt some stubborn piece of anger in himself shift, not vanishing, merely losing its centrality. Yoda turned his gaze inward for a moment, as though listening to a current beneath everyone else's speech. Bent by war, the Order has been, he said. Bent by pride, perhaps more. Love forbidden, attachment named. But hidden, love does not vanish. It rots. Into fear it rots. Into possession. Into anger. This we have seen. The rain kept falling. The city beyond blurred and sharpened again as lightning moved somewhere in the clouds. Obi-Wan spoke softly. What matters now is not which of our failings can be most elegantly defended. What matters is which failings Sidious prepared to exploit next. Shakti straightened. There is something. Everyone turned. When the trooper Tup murdered a Jedi on Ringo Vinda, she said, there was an investigation. Fives believed all clones carried inhibitor chips implanted on Kamino. He became erratic, but not entirely incoherent. He tried to reach the Council. He tried to reach Anakin and Captain Rex. Chancellor's officials intervened. Records were sealed. Anakin's mind caught fire with memory. Fives in a restricted med chamber, eyes wide and desperate, telling him there was a conspiracy, something in the clones, something no one wanted discovered. Anakin had believed the trooper frightened, unwell, tragic perhaps. He had not believed him enough. Rex, he thought suddenly. Ahsoka. Mandalore. Mace, face darkened. Why was this not pursued? It was, Shakti said, and the quiet severity in her answer stopped him. Until the Chancellor's office declared the matter classified in the interests of morale and war readiness. The Kaminoans assured us it was a medical anomaly. We accepted that assurance because it was expedient. Padmé gave a humorless breath. There seems to have been an abundance of expediency. Yoda turned to Anakin. Captain Rex. With Ahsoka he is. Yes, Anakin said. On Mandalore. With Maul in custody, if the operation held. Recall them, Mace said immediately. Obi-Wan nodded. And Cody too. If Fives was right, this is bigger than one trooper. Shakti took a step toward the central console. I can reopen the medical files, if they haven't been erased. If they have, Padmé said, that will be evidence too. The chamber changed then. Not in mood. There was too much grief and suspicion left for that. But in vector. Until that moment, everyone had been standing amid the ruins of revelation. Now a thread of action reappeared. Anakin felt it with particular force. The clones. Men who had trusted him, fought beside him, laughed with him in gunships between bombardments. Men the Republic had named property when it wanted convenience, and heroes when it wanted sacrifice. If Palpatine had placed some hidden command inside them all, then every friendship forged in war had been living above a buried mine. Rex's face rose in his mind, then Cody's, then dozens more. "I'll go to Kamino," Anakin said. "Not alone," Obi-Wan said at once. A flicker of something almost like relief crossed Anakin before he could hide it. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise." Padmé looked at him, seeing perhaps both the purpose and the danger in it. "Bring back proof," she said. "The Senate can doubt a confession. It cannot easily ignore a programmed army." Mace inclined his head once. "Agreed." Yoda closed his eyes briefly, old face lined with a sorrow that seemed larger than this one crisis, as if he were grieving not only what had been done, but the long sequence of small prides and omissions that had permitted it. "Broken many things are," he said. "Hide it from that. We will not. Repair what we can, we must." Then he opened his eyes and looked at Anakin with a steadiness more searching than judgmental. "Chosen one or not, Skywalker, no future is won in a single moment. Chosen again and again, the light must be." Anakin bowed his head. Outside, rain ran down the temple glass in silver streams. In the chambers below, the bodies of Kit Fisto, CZ and Agent Collar waited for rights. In the city, senators sharpened arguments. In the detention levels, Palpatine was almost certainly speaking in some low, persuasive tone to whichever guard or clerk or officer had not yet learned that politeness from monsters was merely another kind of hunger. And in a cruiser above Mandalore, somewhere beyond the night, Ahsoka and Rex were already on their way toward the next truth no one had wanted in time. The shuttle from Mandalore arrived under a sky the color of forged steel. Anakin waited in the temple auxiliary hangar before dawn, the air cold enough that each breath felt newly manufactured inside him. He had not slept. Obi-Wan had, perhaps for an hour in a chair and without admitting it. Rex's recall signal had gone out within minutes of the Council's decision. The response came from hyperspace, brief and professional. The voice at its center strained but unmistakably alive. "Mission complete. Maul secured. Approaching Coruscant." Anakin found that he had been braced for catastrophe until that moment. Some part of him, trained by loss, had already begun imagining what form the next cruelty might take. Hearing Rex's voice did not banish that habit. It only interrupted it. The shuttle settled with a hiss of repulsors. Ramps unfolded. Troopers moved first, controlled and alert, their armor marked by siege work on Mandalore. Then Rex emerged bareheaded, blonde hair cropped close, blue jag eyes painted across his helmet tucked under one arm. He looked older than the last time Anakin had seen him, though perhaps all the clones did now that the Republic's lies had begun peeling back from them. Behind him came Ahsoka. For a heartbeat, the hangar, the troopers, the war, all of it went distant. She wore armor and soft brown wraps stained by battle and travel. Her lekku were marked by grime. The blue blades Anakin had returned to her before Mandalore hung at her hips. She carried herself not like the Padawan he remembered, nor even like the fugitive youth who had walked away from the Order, but like someone who had built a self from exile and no longer intended to surrender it to any institution for free. Anakin took one step forward. Ahsoka stopped at the foot of the ramp and looked at him in silence. He had imagined this moment in 100 defensive ways. Humor, apology sharpened into wit. Some easy affection brought enough to cover the years. None survived her gaze. It was not hostile. Worse, it was honest. "You made it back," he said, and immediately wished for better words. "So did you," she answered. There was enough in that sentence that neither of them could move carelessly around it. Rex, not for the first time in his life, chose mercy by way of bluntness. "Mandalore's a mess. Maul's twice as bad. Bo-Katan wants coordination with the Senate before anyone decides the whole planet belongs to the nearest fleet." Bo-Katan Kryze descended behind him, gaunt with exhaustion and battle-ragged pride. Her gaze moved over the temple interior with all the suspicion of a woman who had spent too long watching central governments rename conquest as stability. "I'm not here for ceremony," she said. "I'm here because the man in that hold was ranting about your Chancellor before you lot even admitted you had a problem. That man was brought out next under force binders, stun manacles, and enough armed escort to satisfy Mace's paranoia, which in the present climate no longer counted as excess." Maul walked between guards with his head high, red and black face unreadable except for the yellow eyes, which burned with an amusement so malicious it seemed almost ceremonial. The capture devices at his wrists did nothing to diminish his sense of theater. When he saw Anakin, the amusement sharpened. "Skywalker," he said, voice rich with old contempt and a new species of fascination. "How disappointing." Rex's hand moved toward his blaster. Ahsoka's did not move at all. Anakin held Maul's gaze. "You're in no position to be disappointed." Maul smiled without showing pleasure. "On the contrary, I have spent some time imagining the galaxy arranged around your ruin. Sidious spent far longer. To find you standing upright is almost enough to make me pity him." Mace arrived then, flanked by temple guards. His eyes took in Maul, Bo-Katan, Rex, Ahsoka, Anakin, and in that sweep measured an entire cluster of political complications. He settled first on Ahsoka. "Tano, Master Windu." The air cooled by several degrees. To Mace's credit or necessity, he did not waste their time on old injuries. "You and Captain Rex are needed for a matter regarding the clone army." Rex's expression changed immediately. "Sir, we'll brief you inside," Obi-Wan said, emerging from the side corridor. He nodded to Bo-Katan. "Lady Kryze, my congratulations if the word applies to surviving Maul." "Barely," she said. Ahsoka and Anakin still had not moved toward each other. They were near enough now to feel one another through the Force with painful ease. He sensed caution, anger worn smooth by time. Love not vanished, but changed into something that would no longer permit itself to be taken for granted. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Ahsoka's mouth twitched, not with humor. "You owe me more than one." "I know." That, more than any polished phrasing might have, shifted something in her face. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But permission to continue. "I should have stood beside you," Anakin said. "Not after. Not privately. There. You should have believed the person in front of you before the institution behind you," Ahsoka said. The sentence landed cleanly. He did not defend himself. "Yes." A slow breath left her. Well, that would make two of us who are done helping institutions lie about what they are." Done. Anakin looked at her more sharply. Ahsoka's gaze flicked, almost imperceptibly, toward the temple and then toward him. For the first time he wondered how much she had always known, not only about the Council's failings, but about Padmé, about him, about the many forms of secrecy people call duty when they wish to feel honorable. Rex cleared his throat. "Are we reuniting or arresting each other? Because I'd like to know before somebody hands me new orders." That broke the moment enough for everyone to breathe. The briefing took place in a secured chamber below the council level. Bo-Katan sat with the rigid impatience of someone tolerating Republic procedure only because she lacked a faster alternative. Maul remained in a separate ray-shielded alcove, visible and smirking. Ahsoka and Rex heard everything. Palpatine's identity, the duel, the Senate crisis, the sealed medical records, Five's warnings now cast in a new and terrible light. Rex went very still when Tup's name came up. Then Five's. Many had served beside, laughed beside, argued with in barracks thick with calf steam and exhaustion. "I should have listened harder," he said. "You did listen," Ahsoka said quietly. "No one let you finish." Shakti laid a data file on the table. "We believe every clone may carry an implanted behavioral chip. We need witnesses who knew Fives, and we need a commander the men trust." Rex's jaw tightened. "If it's true, if there's an order in us, something we never chose." He did not finish. He did not need to. Anakin found himself watching the captain's face with a severity bordering on grief. How many times had he told the clones they were not droids, not expendable, not merely numbers on a battlefield? He had meant it every time, yet he had still fought within a system that bought and deployed them as though personhood could be leased by the campaign. "We'll find out," Anakin said. "And if it's true, we end it." Maul laughed from behind the ray shield. Every eye turned. "You still think in such tidy lines," he said. "Find out. End it." As if knowledge were a clean blade, Sidious built a civilization around obedience. Not just armies. Offices. Courts. Credits. Fear of disorder. Your clones are only the most elegant expression of a principle the Republic already adored. Nay. Mace stepped toward the shield. "Speak usefully, or be silent." Maul tilted his head. "I have already been useful. I told the girl what was coming to Skywalker. I only miscalculated one variable." Ahsoka's gaze narrowed. "What variable?" "You," Maul said to Anakin. "The possibility that fear would fail." Silence followed, uneasy because it contained truth from a hateful source. Maul turned his eyes toward Rex. "Ask yourself, clone, why a Sith Lord would invest so heavily in an army bred for compliance. Ask yourself why your dead brother went mad trying to warn you." Rex looked like a man standing over an unexploded charge and realizing the ground he had trusted for years was hollow. Bo-Katan rose. "You people can argue theology and betrayal all day. Mandalore still needs recognition, and I'm not leaving him in your capital any longer than necessary." "Me. You have my word," Bail said from the doorway, having arrived with uncanny instinct for rooms where history became expensive. "Mandalore will be heard." Bo-Katan studied him and, finding at least less deception there than elsewhere, gave one curt nod. By the time the meeting ended, the shape of the next move was unavoidable. Ahsoka would accompany the Kamino mission not as Jedi envoy, but as independent witness, and because none of them trusted what lay ahead enough to leave her out of it. Rex would come as commander in evidence. Cody, recalled from Utapau, would meet them there. Shakti would handle the medical and contract records. Obi-Wan would handle diplomacy until diplomacy failed. Anakin would do what he always did when the people he loved were threatened. Move too fast if not stopped, and straight through the center if not diverted. Ahsoka caught him alone only once before departure. It was in the hangar again, under the same cold lights, while deck crews fueled transports, and the city beyond dimmed toward morning. She stood with arms folded, studying him not as student to master nor sister to brother, but as one survivor weighing another. "You're different," she said. "I'd hope so." "No." She shook her head. "Not older, not sadder, different." Anakin looked toward the transport where Rex was conferring with flight crews. "I was very close," he said. She absorbed that without flinching. "I know." He looked back at her. "How?" Ahsoka's expression turned distant, remembering Maul and chains on Mandalore, the rage with which he had spoken Skywalker's name, the sick certainty in his voice when he described Sidious' design. "Because the dark side leaves a smell on the future when it thinks it already owns it," she said. And then suddenly it didn't. He let out a breath that might have been laughter in another life. "That sounds like something Master Yoda would say if he were angrier." Ahsoka's mouth softened despite herself. Then she grew serious again. "Whatever happens on Kamino, don't ask me to trust the Order because it's the Order." "I won't," Anakin said. "Trust me, because I'm telling the truth." Ahsoka held his gaze for one long moment. "That," she said, "is at least a beginning." Kamino received them in thunder. The planet always felt less like a world than a verdict. Endless dark water. Endless rain. Cities raised on stilts above an ocean that looked perfectly capable of swallowing them without comment. Their transport descended through sheets of storm into the stark white geometry of Tipoca City, where the corridors smelled of antiseptic, ozone, and long-maintained secrets. Anakin had come to Kamino before, but not like this. Then, he had seen only military necessity dressed in science. Rows of troops. Efficient production. A solution to a war that the Republic preferred not to examine too closely. Now he walked the polished corridors with Ahsoka on one side, Rex and Cody behind him, Obi-Wan's measured caution nearby, and Shaak Ti leading them toward records the Chancellor had once hidden under classification seals. The place had changed because he had. Everything clinical now looked funereal. Clone cadets watched them through observation glass as they passed. Boys with the same face at 15 stages of expression, trying with uneven success to stand straighter when commanders approached. Boys born into usefulness before any of them had been allowed a private thought. Ahsoka slowed once, looking through the glass at a line of them performing close-quarter drills with blunted rifles. "They're children," she said. Rex heard it. Something moved across his features and was gone. Lama Su met them in a reception chamber overlooking the storm. The Kaminoan Prime Minister's long neck inclined in greeting with all the courteous emptiness of a being who considered biological ethics a matter of contract interpretation. General Skywalker. General Kenobi. Commander Tano Dada. His smooth gaze rested on Ahsoka only briefly. To the Kaminoans, institutions mattered more than the subtleties of who had stepped outside one. "Captain Rex, Commander Cody, we were not informed your inquiry required such a distinguished delegation." "That was deliberate," Obi-Wan said pleasantly. Nala stood a pace behind Lama Su, her fingers folded with surgical precision. If fear existed in Kaminoan bodies as it did in human ones, Anakin saw a version of it in the minute stillness of her hands. Shaak Ti did not waste time. "We require full access to the medical records surrounding CT-5385 and ARC Trooper 5s, as well as all behavioral modification protocols associated with the clone template." Lama Su's black eyes did not blink. "Those records are sensitive." "Yes," Obi-Wan said. "That is rather the point." Nalasa spoke for the first time. "There was an incident. It was investigated. The matter was concluded. By the Chancellor's office," Ahsoka said. Nalasi's head tilted. "By the client authority." Rex took one step forward. "We're not merchandise." The room seemed to notice him more fully then, as if a tool had raised its voice and startled the shelf that held it. Lama Su spread delicate hands. "Captain, the army exists because of a legal commission. No disrespect is intended." "Then improve your intent," Cody said flatly. Anakin turned to Obi-Wan in time to catch the smallest flicker of approval before diplomacy reassembled itself on his former master's face. Access was granted because it could no longer be cleanly refused. That did not make it willing. Tipoca City opened itself in layers. Administrative vaults, medical archives, growth labs where translucent forms drifted in nutrient tanks, classrooms, training decks, and operating theaters immaculate enough to make pain seem procedural. The Kaminoans moved through it all with composed efficiency, but the edges of that composure had begun to fray. Azi-3 was discovered in a maintenance sub-level where one of Shaak Ti's medics had hidden the droid after 5's death, more from stubborn conscience than hope. The medical droid greeted them in clipped, anxious tones, and immediately confirmed that records had been altered under Nala C's authority. "Substantial data deletion detected," Azi said. "Behavioral inhibitor files reassigned. Surgical implantation logs restricted. Access denied to all non-Kaminoan personnel under Chancellor Directive." "Can you restore them?" Shaak Ti asked. "Partially," Azi said. "Assuming Dr. Nalasa ceases pretending the files do not exist." Nalasa did not answer. Her face, such as human eyes could read it, gave away almost nothing. But Anakin felt the force of her caution, an icy professional instinct colliding with the understanding that the patron who once shielded her no longer sat secure above the Republic. The first undeniable proof emerged in a surgical chamber. Rex insisted on going first. No one argued long, though Anakin tried and failed briefly out of pure protective reflex. The captain settled onto the diagnostic cradle with a composure that cost him. Ahsoka stood near his shoulder. Cody remained near the door as if refusing to let his own body flinch before the result. Shaak Ti guided the scanner. Ozzy monitored neural imaging. Nala say, compelled by circumstances and by the impossibility of preserving a lie once the machinery began speaking, activated the deeper layers of the medical display. There it was, a minute organic device lodged near the brainstem, integrated with frightening elegance into living tissue. Not an accidental growth. Not a response to battlefield trauma. An object put there. Rex stared at the image with the face of a man meeting his own betrayal in an anatomy he never chose. Fives was right, he said. No one answered because nothing sufficient existed. Cody stepped forward next without waiting to be asked. His scan showed the same thing. So did the random trooper Shakti selected from a training rotation. So did a cadet barely old enough to shave. Row after row of records bloomed open as Ozzy restored more files. Every clone bore the implant. Behavioral modification chip. The Kaminoan designation read. Contingency compliance architecture. High command override capacity. Anakin felt the room dim around the edges. Override for what? He asked, though the word already had teeth. Nalase was silent. Mace was not there to radiate pressure. Yoda was light years away. But Anakin carried enough force inside him in that moment to make the room itself feel dangerous. For what? He repeated. Lama Su answered this time, perhaps because he still believed explanation could preserve control. For stability. The clone army was engineered for obedience under extraordinary battlefield conditions. The inhibitor chips were precautionary. Precautionary against whom? Ahsoka said. The Prime Minister's gaze moved toward the display, and then away. Against disobedience, mental degradation, behavioral drift. Ozzy made a disapproving sound. That it is not entirely accurate. Nalisa turned on the droid with sudden sharpness. AZ. The hidden protocols were not standard medical safeguards, the droid said. They were command-specific behavioral directives accessible under restricted authority. This unit recorded portions of ARC Trooper 5's findings before deletion. A screen lit with restored fragments, coded military orders, contingency designations, a list of command authorizations embedded beneath hundreds of ordinary wartime procedures. There, Order 66. Not an abstract doctrine. A direct instruction. In the event of Jedi treason, clone forces would eliminate their Jedi commanders immediately. The room went silent in a new and more complete way. Rex did not look at the screen. He looked at Anakin. The captain's expression held horror, yes, but also something worse. Shame for an act not yet committed and never chosen. If that order had come... Anakin stepped forward before the sentence could finish and gripped Rex's forearm. It didn't. Rex's throat worked. But it was in me. In all of you, Cody said, voice stripped to bare iron. Ahsoka looked at the glowing order as if it were a corpse she had once known in life. He built an army to murder its own generals from inside their trust. From inside its own self, Shakti said. And there was fury in her now, rare and cold. Nalisa drew herself up. The order was part of the commission design provided through Lord Tyrannus under the authority of the Republic's principal client. We were assured it would protect the state against betrayal at the highest levels. Obi-Wan's eyes sharpened. Tyrannus. It was always a shock, however often repeated, to watch Dooku's many masks align in retrospect. Jedi. Idealist. Separatist leader. Sith apprentice. Architect of an army for the Republic he publicly opposed. The elegance of Sidious's treachery was enough to make even comprehension feel complicit. Sifo Dyas commissioned the army, Obi-Wan said. Tyrannus altered it. Nalisa gave a minute inclination. The original order provided a structure. Tyrannus refined operational directives. Refined, Ahsoka said, and the disgust in her voice made the word curdle. Outside the chamber, warning tones began to sound. All heads turned. Ozzy's photoreceptors flashed. Archive purge initiated. Nalisi's gaze moved, very slightly, toward the ceiling. Lama Su did not move at all, which was answer enough. Obi-Wan's expression went razor thin. Prime Minister. Lama Su folded his hands. The preservation of Kamino intellectual property is not negotiable. If the Republic intends to criminalize authorized design parameters, then Kamino must protect itself. Rex sat up from the diagnostic cradle with dangerous slowness. You built men with murder hidden in our heads, and you're talking about property. Security shutters slammed down across the far exits. White light deepened to warning red. Through the observation window, Anakin saw archive droids begin moving toward the central databanks, with incineration modules unfolding from their chassis. Everything afterward happened fast. Ahsoka was already moving toward the door controls. Obi-Wan cut one shutter panel with a clean blue stroke before it sealed fully. Cody had his blaster out. Rex, barely off the cradle, grabbed a dropped carbine. Shakti secured the restored data core from Ozzy with one hand and shoved the droid towards secondary routes with the other. Anakin hit the emergency release with the Force and tore the half-sealed shutter upward hard enough to twist its track. Go! They spilled into the corridor as the first security droids rounded the corner. Kamino and police machines, sleek, white, and armed for crowd suppression that translated easily into murder under the right software. Cody shot the first through the head. Rex took the second at the joint. Ahsoka's blue blade flashed twice and sent dismembered pieces skidding across the wet floor. Stormwater blew in from an open maintenance junction where one shield had failed. The polished corridor became slick underfoot. Clone cadets, caught between sections by the lockdown, pressed themselves against walls as blaster fire sparked over their heads. Get them out! Ahsoka shouted. Rex pivoted instantly from combat to command. South drill corridor! Move, move, move! The boys obeyed him with the same reflex Anakin had once admired as discipline, and now hated as engineered necessity. Yet there was fear in them too, real and human, and something in the way Rex herded them with one arm and fired with the other made the entire Republic seem guilty at once. Anakin and Obi-Wan drove toward the archive wing. Security droids poured from side doors. Lama Su and Nala Se had vanished behind internal blast seals. The storm thundered around the city, each peal making the corridor lights tremble. At the archive nexus, they found the incineration units already active, white flame crawling through racks of suspended data crystals. Anakin did not think. He seized the central coolant line with the Force and ripped it open. Vapor exploded through the room. Obi-Wan vaulted a burning console and sliced the power relay before the purge could cascade deeper. Shakti arrived 3 seconds later with the core Ozzy had salvaged, and a face colder than Kamino's seas. More records are mirrored in growth maintenance, she said. If they're destroyed, we lose surgical timestamps and implant batch origins. Then we don't lose them, Anakin said. They split. That was when the clone commandos appeared. Not line troopers. Not cadets. A black armored detachment from Kamino's internal security reserve, bred from the same template as every other clone, but trained to follow classified protocols with even less question than most. Their rifles were set to lethal. Their helmets made them faceless in a new and more sinister way. Rex stopped dead when he saw them. They're ours. One of the commandos raised a rifle. By order of Tipoca Command and Republic Intelligence Authority, surrender all restricted medical data. Republic Intelligence Authority is exactly what we're questioning, Obi-Wan said. The trooper did not blink. Surrender now. Anakin could feel the chips in them like a wrongness under the skin of the Force, not because the devices themselves glowed darkly, but because they had been made to interrupt choice. Every living being pushed outward, even in pain, towards some expression of self. The chips had been designed to fold that outward motion back into command. Rex stepped ahead of the Jedi before anyone could stop him. Stand down, he said. The black armored troopers hesitated. Not long, but enough. Whatever protocol they carried, whatever legal fiction had shaped them into this moment, Rex authority still touched something in them that was not merely conditioning. Recognition, shared life, shared barracks, shared origin. It bought 3 heartbeats. Then one of them fired. The bolt missed Rex only because Cody hit him in the shoulder at the same instant. The corridor became battle. Blaster fires screamed. Ahsoka's sabers moved like blue weather. Obi-Wan's blade turned bolts aside into the walls. Shakti disarmed one commando with a single elegant cut, and then stunned him rather than killing him. Anakin tore 2 rifles free and crushed them against the ceiling. Rex slammed a trooper to the floor and did not shoot when he could have. Cody covered him, jaw locked hard enough to crack teeth. "Stun settings!" Rex shouted. Ahsoka obeyed immediately. Obi-Wan switched his capture grip without breaking rhythm. Anakin took a beat longer, not from reluctance but from fury so bright he had to choose against it. Then he slammed the next commando into a wall with controlled force and held him there unconscious, rather than broken. The fight ended in smoke, water, and the smell of scorched plastoid. No one spoke for a moment. Then Rex looked at the stunned troopers around them and said, very quietly, "We were going to do this to all of you." No one contradicted him because everyone knew what he meant. By the time they reached the growth maintenance vault, Ozzy had routed surviving files into a portable matrix. Surgical schedules, implant manifests, correspondence signed under Tyrannus's encrypted channel, a client authorization chain leading not to the Senate or the Army Procurement Board, but to private executive access beneath the Chancellor's office. Enough not only to prove the chips existed, but to tie their most secret protocol to Palpatine's hidden machinery of rule. Lama Su and Nala Se were finally cornered in a command gallery overlooking the storms. The Prime Minister kept his composure even now. Kamino fulfilled its contract. "No," Shakti said, voice terrible in its calm. "Kamino helped build a massacre and hid it inside children." Nala Se said nothing until Ahsoka asked, "Did you ever think of them as people?" Something unreadable moved in the Kaminoan doctor's face. They were expensive to make. It was perhaps the most honest answer she had ever given. Rex flinched as if struck. Anakin wanted, for one blistering instant, to throw every Kaminoan in the room through the glass, and let the sea decide the rest. The anger arrived hot and old, born of slavery, of markets, of seeing bodies priced and shipped and explained away by administrative language. He stood within it long enough to recognize it, and then stepped back from it by force. "We take the evidence," he said. "We take witnesses, and then the Republic decides whether it still wants to pretend it never knew what it was buying." Rex bent and picked up the tiny image of his own chip, rendered in cold blue light on the portable display. He stared at it as if it were the smallest thing in the galaxy and therefore the most unforgivable. "Fives was right," he said again. This time there was no uncertainty in the statement at all, only grief. And beneath the grief, something beginning to harden into refusal. The tribunal opened beneath a dome of red and gold with enough ceremony to disguise nothing. Coruscant had decided by then that crisis was its preferred weather. Crowds packed the avenues below the Senate quarter. Holocrons hung in swarms outside security cordons. Commentators breathlessly narrated every arriving pod as if history were a sporting event that might be won by posture. Inside, the special tribunal chamber held senators, jurists, military auditors, and representatives from sectors that had once applauded every expansion of Palpatine's authority. Now they sat with the fastidious tension of beings discovering that accountability was uncomfortable even when aimed elsewhere. Palpatine entered under heavy guard and looked, at first glance, diminished. That was part of the performance. He wore plain dark robes without insignia. The withered ruin of his face was left exposed. He moved more slowly than before, one hand resting on the rail as if the injuries from the arrest had made fragility his new political costume. Yet none of that touched the eyes. Those were bright as poisoned stars, alert to every tremor in the room, calculating which fear was ripest in which cluster of sentience. Anakin felt that gaze touch him once and move on. He had not seen Palpatine since the detention level. He had hoped distance might have diminished the older man's presence. It had not. The Sith seemed less like a captive than an infection waiting for a wound. Evidence came first. The red saber recovered from the Chancellor's office. Hidden vault access beneath executive chambers. Encrypted communications linking Tyrannus to private command channels within the Chancellor's network. Kamino on medical records. Testimony from Shakti. Technical confirmation from judicial analysts that the chips were not myth, not accident, not emergency treatment, but manufactured command interfaces installed across the clone army. Rex took the stand in armor stripped of campaign markings, as if he had decided not to let the Republic hide behind any banner while he spoke. He described Fives' warnings. Tubbs' breakdown. The discovery on Kamino.c. He did not dramatize. He did not need to. The plainness of his account cut deeper than any rhetoric. "Would you have obeyed Order 66? One jurist asked, voice thin with the shame of even forming the question. Rex looked at the chamber and answered with the terrible honesty of a soldier who no longer intended to protect the institutions that had used him. "If the chip fired," he said, "it wouldn't have mattered what I wanted." The statement moved through the chamber like a pressure wave. A few senators looked away. Others leaned forward as though proximity might relieve them of complicity. Cody spoke after him. Izzy's records followed. Nala Se, compelled under threat of prosecution and stripped of her old patron's protection, confirmed the chain of authorization leading through Tyrannus and upward into executive command. Lama Su attempted to bury ethics beneath contractual language and succeeded only in sounding monstrous in better acoustics. Yet when Palpatine was finally permitted to answer, the room shifted again. He stood without visible strain. He placed both hands on the rail. When he spoke, his voice was soft enough that the chamber had to quiet itself to hear him. "How fortunate," he said, "that every irregularity in this war can now be attributed to the man who won it." A murmur rippled and died. He continued. "A republic under attack, commissioned an army through legal channels, because the Jedi had failed to anticipate separatist militarization. I ratified what necessity required. If that army contained hidden directives, then perhaps the Senate should question why the Jedi, who commanded it for years, never discovered them until after they assaulted the head of state." No. Mace did not move, but Anakin felt the older man's anger rise like controlled flame. Palpatine's gaze swept the chamber. "I am accused of centralizing power. The Senate granted it. I am accused of militarization. The Jedi led the armies. I am accused of secrecy by an order that hides its deliberations behind temple walls, and by a government that keeps 1,000 classified ledgers no citizen may read." No. The brilliance of him had always lain partly here, not in fabricating lies from nothing, but in selecting truths already compromised and arranging them so that guilt dispersed into helplessness. He turned then, as if reluctantly, toward Anakin. "And I am accused of manipulating one young knight whose own superiors used him as an informant because they lacked the courage to confront me directly." That struck. It struck because it was true enough to wound. Some senators looked toward Mace. Some toward Yoda. The Jedi had known this line of attack was coming, and still it landed like fresh shrapnel. Palpatine inclined his head by the smallest degree. If Jedi doctrine made that knight so stable, why did he hide a wife? Why did he lie to his order? Why was he vulnerable at all, if not because the order itself breeds hypocrisy, and then pretends shock when human feeling refuses to die on command? The chamber erupted. Anakin had known this might happen. Padmé had known better. She was already rising. Bail was already objecting to relevance. Mace looked one syllable away from drawing steel on parliamentary procedure. Yet over the noise Anakin felt, with a clarity so sudden it was almost relief, that Palpatine had chosen the wrong weapon, because the truth no longer belonged to him. Anakin stood. The chamber quieted not all at once, but in widening rings. He walked to the central speaking platform alone. For one irrational second he remembered being a boy in Watto's shop, watched by strangers who wanted to know what kind of value he contained. Then the memory dissolved. He was no longer available for purchase. "Palpatine is right about one thing," he said. The statement startled everyone, including Palpatine, who masked it almost instantly. "The order failed me," Anakin said. "Not because it taught discipline, because it mistook silence for discipline and fear for wisdom. It saw my attachments and treated them as contamination instead of truth. It asked me to spy. It distrusted me while depending on me. And I let that become anger. He paused. No one in the chamber moved. I married Padmé Amidala because I loved her and because after years of war and loss, I could no longer believe the right answer was to deny that love existed. I lied because I was afraid. Afraid of the council. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of visions I did not understand. Padmé rose then and did not speak, because she understood that standing beside truth was sometimes more powerful than interrupting it. She descended from her pod and came to stand where everyone could see her, one hand resting lightly over the life she carried. The chamber inhaled. Anakin went on. Palpatine knew what I feared because he cultivated the fear himself. He offered me power to prevent death, not healing, not wisdom, power. And I nearly accepted because frightened people are easy to tempt when they have been taught to hide the very thing being threatened. The old holonet cameras would replay that sentence for years. He turned slightly, enough that his gaze took in senators, jurists, Jedi and clones alike. But my fear does not absolve him. And the Order's failure does not absolve him. And the Senate's willingness to hand him emergency powers does not absolve him. None of our failures make his design less deliberate. He engineered a war. He built an army with murder hidden inside obedience. He set the Republic and the Separatists against each other and fed on the dead. He told me he could save my wife. What he meant was that he could own my soul if I let him. Damn. The chamber was absolutely still now. Palpatine watched him without blinking. Anakin faced him directly. I will not let you tell my story for me. Something changed in the room then. Not because every doubt vanished. Not because scandal became virtue. But because confession had broken the geometry Palpatine preferred. He could exploit hidden shame. Public truth gave him less purchase. Padmé spoke at last. I stand with Anakin Skywalker, she said, and though she had not planned those exact words until that moment, the certainty in them made planning unnecessary. Not because no law was broken. Laws have often been broken in the service of preserving appearances while the Republic rotted underneath them. I stand with him because he told the truth before it could save him. This chamber should consider how rare that has become. Nay. Bail followed with motions already prepared. Revocation of all emergency powers. Dissolution of executive wartime decrees pending review. An independent constitutional commission. Immediate suspension of Jedi military command pending negotiated transition. And recognition of clone personhood before the law. It was an audacious package. On another day, it would have died in committee by the third clause. On this day, the chamber had been dragged too close to its own reflection to pretend old procedures were adequate. Yoda rose then, small and ancient beneath the red lights. For our failures answer we will, he said. Withdraw from command, the Jedi shall. To civil review submit, the Order will. Above law, no guardian should stand. That statement did more than rebut the coup narrative. It severed the most potent line of fear still feeding it. Mace's jaw tightened at the concession, yet he did not object. Obi-Wan looked almost relieved, as if some burden he had carried through the war had at last been named heavy. The vote was not clean. It was not noble. It was fought through with procedural blades, threatened alliances, trembling moderates, and several pods leaving in outrage before the tallies closed. Mazameta argued for continuity, until continuity sounded obscene. Corporate senators tried to narrow the charges to personal misconduct, and found themselves shouted down by worlds that had buried too many soldiers. Several military blocs abstained rather than condemn the man under whose authority they had risen. But the motions passed. Not all by wide margins. Enough. Emergency powers were stripped pending full constitutional review. Palpatine was remanded to indefinite high-security detention under joint civil and Jedi oversight pending criminal trial on charges of treason, war crimes, conspiracy in the creation of unlawful military controls, and orchestration of armed conflict against the Republic itself. When the verdict segment was read, Palpatine did not flinch. He turned his head slightly toward Anakin and smiled the smallest smile. "You think this is enough," the smile said. "You think exposure is defeat." Anakin held his gaze, and for the first time, found that he no longer needed the older man to be afraid for his own strength to hold. Outside, the Senate quarter exploded into opposing chants. Some celebrated, some rioted, some demanded the release of the Chancellor. Some called for the abolition of the Jedi. The Republic had not become virtuous in an afternoon. It had simply stopped being able to lie to itself in the same exact words. That night, the news feeds showed 3 images without cease: Palpatine's ruined face, Rex's medical scan, and Padmé standing beside Anakin in the tribunal chamber, as the galaxy learned what love and scandal looked like when neither bothered to kneel to secrecy anymore. The attack came 2 weeks before the formal sentencing phase and less than an hour after Padmé's labor began. It was, Anakin would later think, exactly the sort of timing Palpatine favored. A moment arranged so that fear might force the wrong choice, and then call itself necessity after the fact. Padmé had insisted on remaining on Coruscant until the Constitutional Commission was secure enough to survive her absence. Bail argued with her. So did her physicians. So did Anakin, though his arguments had grown less commanding and more honest since the Chancellor's fall. In the end, she stayed because the Republic was in the middle of remaking itself, and because Padmé did not believe delegation was always a moral substitute for presence. Her first contraction struck while she was reviewing clone citizenship language with Mon Mothma and 2 legal aides in a private apartment annexed to a secure medical suite near the Senate district. One moment she was arguing over compensation structures and retirement rights. The next she had both hands on the table and an expression so fierce with pain and irritation that even Mon, ordinarily unflappable, stood up hard enough to send her chair backward. Anakin arrived before the droid staff finished the second round of vitals. He had been at the temple, arguing with Mace about transitional security on the detention levels, and telling himself that his unease was merely fatigue. The moment the call came, every other thought in him went white at the edges. He entered the suite like a storm. Then he saw Padmé on the bed, pale and furious, and breathing through pain that had nothing to do with visions or Sith or prophecy, and everything to do with the oldest labor in creation. And his fear changed into something simpler. He took her hand. She gripped hard enough to grind metal against metal. "If you say, be calm," she said through clenched teeth, "I will name neither child after you." Anakin laughed once, helpless, grateful, near tears already, and bent to press his forehead to hers. "I wasn't going to say that." "Good." Another contraction hit. He stayed where he was. The second call came 9 minutes later. Not from the med droids. From Obi-Wan. The hollow flared from Anakin's belt in a wash of emergency blue. Obi-Wan's face appeared amid red warning light and smoke. Behind him, blaster fire stuttered through a corridor. "Loyalist attack on the judicial detention block," Obi-Wan said. His voice was controlled in that way it always became when events were threatening to turn catastrophic. "Crimson Guards, intelligence officers, and at least 1 Senate security unit. They're trying to breach Palpatine's wing." "Men?" Padmé's fingers tightened on Anakin's hand even though she could not hear every word. Mace's voice sounded faintly behind Obi-Wan, issuing orders. Somewhere farther off, Ahsoka's blade hissed alive. Then the transmission flickered. "We have it contained for the moment," Obi-Wan said. "But if he breaks free?" The old reflex was immediate and brutal. Anakin's body turned half toward the door before his mind had caught up. Enemy. Crisis. The one fight on which everything seemed to depend. For years he had obeyed that summons as if he would cease being himself without it. Then Padmé made a sound. Not loud, not dramatic. Just human and hurting and unmistakably here. And the whole universe rearranged. He looked at Obi-Wan. He looked at the door. He looked at Padmé. In some hidden chamber of his own imagination, fear opened its mouth and offered him the argument it had always offered. If you do not go, disaster. If you are not there, loss. If you do not seize the center of violence yourself, everyone you love will be taken from you by your absence." For once, he knew the voice before it finished speaking. Obi-Wan saw something change in his face. "Anakin," Obi-Wan said, and there was no accusation in it, only urgent understanding. "I'm staying," Anakin said. Padmé turned her head toward him sharply, pain and surprise warring in her eyes. The droids moved around them with quiet efficiency. Another contraction mounted. "If he gets out," Obi-Wan began. "Then stop him," Anakin said, and the trust in his voice made Obi-Wan go still. "You, Mace, Yoda, Ahsoka. Stop him." "I'm staying." For a heartbeat, the hollow held only Obi-Wan's face and the red light pulsing over it. Then something like pride, raw, aching pride, moved there. "We will," Obi-Wan said. The transmission died. Anakin turned back fully to Padmé. The room felt suddenly smaller and infinitely more real. No armies, no prophecies, no chosen destiny. Only the woman he loved, the life they had made, the terrible bright work of bringing that life into the world. Padmé searched his face. "You chose not to go." "Yes." A shadow of something like wonder crossed her pain-struck features. Then it was swallowed by another contraction, and she bore down with a cry that tore him cleanly through. In the detention complex, battle turned the halls into a furnace. Palpatine's loyalists had chosen well. They struck during guard rotation, used valid codes stolen from a senior intelligence official, cut internal feeds, and moved with the fanatic precision of people who believed history itself required their violence. Crimson Guards died first, not because they had turned against Palpatine, but because half had and half had not. And in the confusion, blade met staff, oath met oath, until allegiance sorted itself in blood. Mace held the central junction with 2 temple guards and a severity fit to split iron. His purple blade was a pulse through smoke. Obi-Wan took the upper catwalks, knocking attackers from railings into stun nets below when he could, cutting them down when he could not. Ahsoka moved through the chaos like judgment with blue fire at either hand, not quite Jedi and therefore somehow freer in battle than any of them had once permitted. Yoda arrived last, and altered the geometry of the fight simply by entering it. Palpatine had already killed 3 men in his wing by the time they reached him. The ray shields were down. The cell door had been breached from within and without, twisted apart under combined sabotage and dark side force. Palpatine stood in the center of the wreckage without his restraints, robes scorched, face alight with a vitality that imprisonment had only concentrated. Lightning flickered from his hands in ragged branches, turning bodies on the floor into brief blue statues. "Too slow," he said. Mace answered with steel. Their blades met in a shriek of violet and scarlet. Palpatine laughed, a sound no human throat should have made while half-burned and weeks from defeat. Obi-Wan came in from the side, Yoda from the front. Ahsoka cut down the last of the Loyalist guards before they could reinforce and sealed the corridor manually with the Force and the emergency blast controls. The duel that followed would not be spoken of publicly in full for years. The Republic had no appetite for knowing how near it had come. Palpatine was weaker than he had been in the Chancellor's office, not because the dark side had left him, but because no triumphant apprentice stood waiting to complete his escape. He fought with fury sharpened by humiliation. He fought with the rage of a man who had built the galaxy into a machine and discovered one crucial gear had chosen not to turn. Mace met him with Vapad's terrible precision. Yoda bent the dark blasts aside as if redirecting weather. Obi-Wan bought openings. Ahsoka exploited them. And through it all, somewhere across the city, Anakin remained where Sidious had never believed he would remain. The Sith felt it. That was the strangest part. In the medical suite, as Padmé labored and the droids murmured measurements, Anakin felt a cold touch pass over the edge of his awareness. Not words exactly. A pressure. A reaching. Palpatine, through pain and conflict, through smoke and broken stone, extending once more that old poisonous invitation. Come, save, choose power, choose control, choose the battle, the enemy, the grand immediate terror, and let love wait in some smaller room until history grants you time for it. Anakin closed his eyes. He put his mechanical hand beneath Padmé's shoulders, and his living hand in hers, and let the cries of their child-to-be anchor him more deeply than any meditation ever had. No, he whispered. Though whether to Padmé's pain, his own fear, or the distant Sith voice, he could not have said. Padmé heard only his presence and tightened her grip again. Then don't say no, she gasped. Say something useful. He laughed, half broken open with devotion. You're doing perfectly. That, she said through gritted teeth, is barely useful. He kissed her forehead. Hours compressed, expanded. The city outside swung from evening to deep night. Mon Mothma waited in the outer hall with Bail and C-3PO, each of them trying in different ways to disguise terror as patience. Sabe stood nearer the inner door than propriety allowed, face unreadable and murderous toward any universe that thought to take Padmé now after all the rest. In the detention complex, Mace finally disarmed Palpatine with a cut so hard it sheared the upper rail from the wall beside him. Obi-Wan knocked the Sith off balance. Yoda collapsed the shattered doorway inward with the Force, pinning Palpatine long enough for temple guards to re-establish layered binders and emergency ray shields. The old man screamed, cursed, promised extinction, promised inevitability, promised that the dark always returned because beings preferred certainty to conscience. Ahsoka stood outside the new shield breathing hard, one blade still lit, and looked at him with a steadiness devoid of fear. Then I guess we'll have to keep choosing, she said. Palpatine bared his ruined teeth at her and said nothing. In the medical suite, the final effort came like the cresting of some immense wave. Padmé cried out once, twice, and then the room changed. Not in noise. There was more noise than ever, but in meaning. One voice became two, thin at first, astonished, furious with air and life. The first infant was placed in Anakin's arms before he understood that his hands were shaking too hard to trust. A small, warm weight, damp, dark hair, a face like no prophecy and every hope. Luke. Dot. The second came moments later, fierce and indignant, eyes squeezed shut against the outrage of existence. Leia. Hera. Padmé, exhausted almost beyond speech, turned her head and smiled at them with a radiance so gentle and complete that Anakin felt something inside himself. Some old permanent tension finally began to uncoil. They're here, he said, voice breaking. Yes, Padmé whispered. He looked at Luke, at Leia, at Padmé alive beneath soft light instead of dying in nightmare shadow. He wept then without shame and without trying to disguise it as relief alone. It was relief. It was gratitude. It was grief for the versions of himself that might have lost this forever. It was the sound a heart made when it discovered the future had not been taken from it after all. Outside, the Republic still trembled. Palpatine still lived. The war's debris still floated across 1,000 systems. The Jedi were still unsure what they would become. The Senate was still the Senate. But in that room, none of those things were central. Anakin sat beside Padmé with one child in each arm and knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with visions, that love was not the chain Palpatine had taught him to fear. Possession was the chain. Secrecy was the chain. Terror was the chain. Love, when told the truth, was something else entirely. Peace did not come as a single document or triumphal parade. It arrived untidily, by revocation and confession, by hearings, by exhausted negotiations, by the gradual collapse of lies that had seemed indispensable until they became impossible to maintain. The war ended in stages. With Grievous dead and Palpatine exposed, the Confederacy fractured faster than anyone in the Republic had predicted and slower than anyone grieving hoped. Some corporate leaders tried to vanish into private fortresses, Some systems sued for terms before their worlds suffered more bombardment. Some truly separatist senators, horrified to learn they had also been played by a Sith Lord, accepted negotiated amnesty in exchange for laying down arms and testifying to the financial pipelines that had funded the war. Padmé, even from confinement and recovery, was central to those talks. Bail and Mon carried others. The language of surrender was amended into the language of reintegration, often enough that a different future, fragile but real, began to appear. The clones did not become free in a speech. They became free in law, then in medicine, then in the much harder daily practice of being treated as men by a galaxy that had bought them as assets. The Clone Personhood Act passed after 3 furious debates and 1 near collapse of the Commission. It recognized legal identity, pay claims, retirement options, and medical autonomy for every clone in Republic service. Surgeries to remove the inhibitor chips began cautiously under Shakti's supervision, and with the help of AZ, whose imperturbable devotion to good procedure turned out to be revolutionary under the right conditions. Not every chip could be removed at once. Some procedures carried risk. Some clones, after years of having choice denied them, found the very idea of choosing unnerving in ways no law could immediately solve. Rex stayed on for a time, not because anyone ordered him to, but because he wanted to help other troopers through the transition. Cody did the same. Their command changed shape. Less generalship, more advocacy, more furious meetings with procurement officers, who kept accidentally revealing how deeply they still thought in terms of inventory. Anakin saw them often. He made a point of it. Not as penance alone, though there was penance in him, but because he no longer wished to build his life around delayed honesty. The Jedi changed too, though more slowly and with more pain than public rumor understood. They relinquished military command in full. That alone altered the temple's air. Barracks emptied. War rooms became archives. Younglings once shepherded between tactical briefings found their corridors quieter, less haunted by armored boots. The council spent long sessions not issuing decrees, but surviving arguments it had postponed for generations. Attachment, service, fear, possession, duty, the meaning of detachment, the difference between love and ownership. These were no longer academic disputes tucked safely behind old doctrine. They had nearly destroyed the Order. That gave everyone a seriousness previous philosophy lacked. Yoda spoke least and listened most. Mace resisted some reforms and championed others, his severity finding new purpose in the hard labor of institutional repentance. Obi-Wan, to Anakin's enduring astonishment, became one of the clearest advocates for a discipline that did not require emotional falsehood. When younger knights challenged him with the passion of the recently vindicated, he met them with enough dry patience to keep them from turning renewal into another orthodoxy. Ahsoka did not rejoin the Order. No one who truly knew her expected that she would. Yet she came and went from the temple on terms that were hers, training relief pilots, advising on Mandalorian reconstruction, and occasionally reducing senior masters to thoughtful silence with one sentence delivered in a tone of perfect courtesy. The younglings adored her. Mace tolerated her as one tolerates a blade that has proven correct too often to ignore. Obi-Wan liked her more openly than he admitted. Anakin loved her without trying to own the shape that love took, which perhaps was the greatest proof of his change. Palpatine remained alive. That was the least satisfying truth in the galaxy and perhaps the most necessary. He was held in a secure facility known only to a handful of Jedi and jurists, under layered guard, ray shields, constant surveillance, and the kind of vigilance born not from confidence but from permanent alarm. He had lost the Senate, the army, the legal fiction of legitimacy, and the apprentice he had intended as the axis of a new empire. He had not lost his mind, his hatred, or his talent for waiting. Anakin visited him only once. It happened 3 months after the twins were born, on a day when the temple felt too crowded with petitioners and infants too miraculous to leave unseen even for an hour. The visit had not been demanded by anyone. It had grown inside him as unfinished business. The cell was dim and silent. Palpatine sat within its field of light, like a black knot tied in the center of all that brightness. When he looked up and saw Anakin, he smiled with no surprise at all. "You came." "Yes." "To gloat?" Anakin considered. "No." Palpatine's eyes glittered. "Then to ask whether I still know how to prevent death." The old temptation had once arrived in Anakin's bloodstream like fire. Now it came as something else, a memory of fire, enough to respect and refuse. "No," he said. "I came to see whether you understood why you failed." That made the Sith laugh, low and dry. "Failed? The Republic is fractured. The Jedi are uncertain. The clones have learned they were designed for treachery. You stand divided between Order, Senate, wife, and children. You call this failure because you still think victory looks clean." "No." Anakin stepped nearer the shield. "I call it failure because I'm not yours." For the first time, something changed in Palpatine's face that was not performance. It was not fear, not even disbelief. It was a thin, unadmitted wound, the affront of a design denied its intended shape. "You believe choice is enough," the Sith said softly. "No," Anakin answered. "I believe it's everything." He left before Palpatine could answer. That too was choice. Months later, on Naboo, the evening light lay over the lake country like poured gold. The retreat house was smaller than the grand palaces of Theed and more honest. Vines climbed the pale stone. Gardens stepped down toward still water that reflected the sky with almost insolent calm. After Coruscant's compression of steel and politics, Naboo felt like a place built by beings who remembered that beauty was not frivolous but civilizing. Padmé sat beneath a flowering arbor with Leia asleep against her shoulder. Luke, wakeful and solemn in the inexplicable way of infants, occupied Anakin's arms, and was at present attempting with great concentration to seize a strand of his father's hair. Ahsoka lounged on the low terrace wall nearby, boots crossed, half amused by everything. She had arrived that morning from a relief convoy on Mandalore, and had immediately won the twins' interest by refusing to treat them as symbols of anything larger than themselves. "That one," she said, nodding toward Leia, "already looks like she intends to rule committees through force of personality alone." Padmé smiled without opening her eyes. "Then she's mine." Luke finally caught Anakin's hair and held it in a tiny, determined fist. Anakin laughed and disentangled himself with the helpless patience fatherhood had extracted from him by means no Jedi training ever managed. "Don't look so pleased," he told Ahsoka. "You'll be next." "With what?" "Babysitting?" Ahsoka made a scandalized sound. "I fought Maul. I survived your council. This is beneath me." "Coward," Anakin said. "Accurate." Obi-Wan arrived along the garden path a little later in plain robes carrying a travel bag, and the expression of a man who had spent the last 4 hours arguing constitutional oversight with senators and had come to Naboo for medicinal reasons. Luke brightened at the sight of him for no reason anyone present could detect. Obi-Wan accepted the child with the careful surprise of someone who had once expected his life to involve far fewer babies and considerably less joy. "You realize," he said to Anakin, settling beside Padmé, "that these two will one day discover every foolish thing you have ever done. Only if you tell them." "I'm counting on it." Padmé opened one eye. "You say that now. Wait until they ask who taught him to fly." Obi-Wan considered. "Fair. I shall begin selectively editing history at once." They sat together while the light softened. For a while no one spoke. The breeze moved through reeds by the water. Somewhere deeper in the garden a fountain murmured. The twins breathed their small sleeping breaths, the entire future contained for the moment in 2 warm human bodies and the people who loved them. Anakin looked at the faces around him. Padmé, no longer hidden. Obi-Wan, no longer distant in the places that mattered. Ahsoka, no longer lost to him, even if she would never belong to the Order again. His children, impossible and here. He thought of Mace in the council chamber wrestling doctrine into something humbler. Of Rex teaching troopers how to speak of themselves without rank first. of Cody arguing pay rights with quartermasters, of Yoda sitting with younglings in the temple gardens, relearning how to teach peace after decades of war, of the Republic, damaged and unfinished, and still in danger of choosing fear on difficult days. The shadow remained. He could feel it in the galaxy's far nerves sometimes, a cold persistence that had not given up merely because it had been named. Palpatine still lived. Hidden loyalists still existed. Power still tempted frightened beings with easy narratives. None of that would vanish because one man had refused one terrible offer. But that was no longer how Anakin understood hope. Hope was not the belief that darkness ended. It was the certainty that darkness could be answered without becoming it. Padmé, sensing his thought as she often did, leaned lightly against his shoulder. "What is it?" He looked out over the water, where the evening had gone from gold to rose, and from rose to the first patient blue of night. For the first time, he said, "I think the future is unwritten." Ahsoka watched him for a moment and then nodded once, as if accepting a report she had been waiting years to hear. Obi-Wan adjusted Leia in his arms, with the solemn concentration of a man diffusing a thermal detonator. Padmé smiled. And beyond the gardens, beyond Naboo, beyond the Senate and the temple and the cells beneath stone, the galaxy turned on, wounded, luminous, full of beings who would choose badly and beautifully and again. Not saved, not doomed, returned at last to choice.